The Public Works and Infrastructure Minister, Dean Macpherson, has laid criminal charges against suspended Independent Development Trust CEO Tebogo IDT's spokesperson, Phasha Makgolane. This follows a Daily Maverick exposé alleging that the duo offered investigative journalist Pieter-Louis Myburgh 60,000 rand in cash to try and get him to quash his investigation into a story on Malaka. We did invite the IDT, I do need to point that out. We did invite the IDT board, but they declined to come on the show, saying the matter is subject to an internal investigation that is now underway. But the question is, when bribery allegations reach the newsroom, can the public still trust the independence of our journalism? That is the central question that we want to focus on. And to unpack that, I'm joined now by Media Monitoring Africa Director, William Bird, as well as Media and Journalism Lecturer, Dr. Trevor Hlungwani. It's great to see the both of you. Dr. Hlungwani, let me start with you, Dr. Hlungwani. Firstly, congratulations on your recent graduation. Of course, he's a familiar face to all of us. One of the stops in his career was here at SABC and other newsrooms where we've worked together. Let me just start with you, Dr. Hlungwani, then and ask you, just when you saw that video, the attempt to bribe a journalist, what went through your mind? Was it a sense of, good for Pieter-Louis Myburgh for standing up and standing by the truth and not falling to this temptation? Or were you concerned that perhaps the reason why this person could be so brazen is that they've attempted this before and perhaps succeeded?
Good day to us and the viewers of the channel. I think there's just many cases which will go unreported. And I think this one specifically tells you about how much the road is in as far as media ethics is concerned. I'll tell you one thing, that this is a case of much concern. It's a global issue, Sometime a few years back, SANEF had to instigate an investigation around that because there's an issue around, the trust that is eroding in media channels, in news, but also issues around public trust. So the findings of their panel, the findings of the investigation was that people have lost interest or they've lost trust in as far as how then the media conducts its work around journalism. But also, as a media scholar or trainer myself, we always want to harper this thing around journalists, the fact that, they need to ensure that when they go into practice, they hold their ethical behavior and ensure that, there's no, at any point during their practice, they are not somehow led by politicians or businesses, because I think business people and politicians particularly, they understand the power that the media holds in as far as, channeling public discourse. So they will go as far as ensuring that they want to cloud the way in which you cover news. So this one specific event, like you allude, it reminds us about many others that go unreported. A few years back, the current Minister of Mineral Resources, went as far as saying he has bribed 2 journalists from Sunday World to have to bury one of the stories that were writing about him. And I can just imagine just how much more are going unreported, which is a cause for concern for the media and the way in which it should do in the country.
William Bird, no doubt you share that sense of concern for the erosion in the public's trust in the media and journalism in particular. Just before we get into the nitty-gritty and some of the details, just your overall reaction. What went through your mind when you saw that video?
Good afternoon. I mean, again, I think it's very much one where the sheer brazenness of it, that they would just happily put down 60,000 rand and think that he was going to take it. And I guess they'd assumed that because he was still communicating with them that he would. You saw in the lead up to the story, of course, when he exposed the earlier one, that there was a concerted campaign, some of it on social media and some by other, journalists and commentators who clearly had been deliberately misled, and you have to then wonder, had they been paid? So I hope that whatever investigation takes place isn't just merely into this particular incident, but that it must surely be into any incident of who was paid and who was spreading the stories that were done deliberately to undermine the credibility of this journalist. So you've got a fairly complex thing there where you know that other journalists must have taken this money or similar amounts before. And I guess to that extent, corruption is rife everywhere in South Africa. To think that one particular sector is going to be excluded from it is just to be in denial of our reality. And that said, when journalists who hold themselves there as watchdogs are the ones that then are seen to be taking bribes or engaged in corrupt practices, it just undermines people's levels of trust and credibility in them. And you have to be looking at our current environment where journalists and trust in journalism itself is declining.
Yeah.
We've got our public broadcaster is on its knees financially. So you can imagine the kind of compromises that are being made in newsrooms around the country.
Let me stick with you, William. Is this the elephant in the room, that this is one of those phenomena that deep down the journalism fraternity knows this is happening? You can't prove that it's happening, but you've got a clear sense that it must be happening. Is this the conversation that is not being had at the moment with any degree of, candor that says this must be a phenomenon that is at play in our fraternity?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what is clear is that you've got this new group of what they then tend to call influencers who are paid to spread and share particular stories. We know some media entities in South Africa are effectively up for sale as PR entities to spread whatever kind of messages you want to do. And I think that's a far more kind of in the open, equally insidious kind of practice that takes place. But in terms of this kind of thing, of journalists taking bribes, being bribed to not write on stories, the kinds of journalists that are doing that kind of work, I mean, the thing about this particular story is did they not look this journalist up? Did they not see the kinds of stories that this journalist has written on beforehand and realize that actually, this kind of approach isn't going to solve their particular problem? Thinking that you can go to that group of investigative journalists and somehow think you're going to get away with a bribe, I think is ridiculous. So as I said, I think that these things do occur. I don't think that it's on the kind of scope that we see here. And certainly in as much as this is an example which suggests that other journalists may well be taking bribes, I don't think it's a widespread challenge with the journalists that are doing this kind of investigative work.
Dr. Hlungwani, your sense, the extent to which this kind of practice happens in the journalism fraternity?
I'll tell you one thing, Tulas, but I think our over-reliance of the professional codes of conduct sometimes is limiting, because and I want to believe that the way in which society is moving, the fact that you would find that sometimes journalists form friendships with politicians and business people. There's nothing wrong with that. And the press code as it is, whatever that governs what we do as conduct, it is no way in which how that will be done. But if you think of that, take it for instance, if I refer to an ANC leader, an SG in a press briefing, and I refer to an EFF leader as Julius, can I be trusted that I can hold the person accountable? Because then you get a sense that between myself and the other person, there's a level of friendships that we have, which in many cases opens up a space where, these people can manipulate, the space in which we work. We talk to these people on WhatsApp, we speak to them on calls, but also you want to understand that if then that goes over and over, what are their perceptions around ethics? What's their perceptions around whether they can respect us as journalists to say that we can hold them accountable? So I think we need to start to think beyond, the codes of conduct, the code of ethics. Now we can use our own human perception around what then governs issues around ethics. Yes, these are our sources. We're going to make relationships with them. But how does that really affect the way in which we hold them accountable? I think it's a point that we should ponder on as professionals.
So how do we future-proof the profession, Dr. Hlungwani, given that many of the interactions between journalists and their sources, and you rightly say, some of those sources, some level of rapport builds up, you know, and in some instances even out and out friendships. How do we future-proof the profession given that dynamic that says much of what we're talking about happens far away from the printed paper, from the airwaves, as it were?
I think we need to sit down amongst ourselves as journalists and talk about these things, you know, away from any regulations, to say, how are we supposed to conduct ourselves as professionals? Forget that we are, you know, we are governed by rules and regulations. By the way, in codes of conduct, some media houses choose not to be part of, you know, the press council, because these are not statutory bodies. You know, they are just voluntary bodies that one has to subscribe if they want to. But I think amongst ourselves, we need to ensure that we sit down and agree amongst us to say that this is how we should conduct ourselves, and this is how we should go, and this is how far we should go if that's the case. And to say that if then we go on doing these things, how do they erode issues around public trust, and also the trust that people have to us, or have on us as professionals?
Yeah, and William Bird, just as a passing shot on your side, you alluded earlier on to the conversation that has happened subsequent to the release of the video that says, of all the journalists you thought you could do this with, you went with Pieter-Louis Myburgh. You really thought you could go to that guy. While it's commendable and it says a lot about him and his character, how do we get to a point where that line and response should be standard, to say you went to a journalist to think you can bribe someone? How do we future-proof? It's the same question, but I'm putting it slightly different. How do we have more Pieter-Louis Myburghs so that in future we say you chose to go to Thulasizwe Semelane of all people?
Exactly. I mean, and I think that one of the other positives of this is that politicians and others who've seen that video are going to think twice about trying to bribe a journalist, because they're going to go, are they videoing us? Are they going to say no? Are they taking this money in the hope that then they're going to expose us? And that's the value that this kind of story really has. So beyond the individual accountability of them, so what we have to see more of is more journalists coming out now and saying, this person attempted to bribe me, this one attempted to. I'm certain that there are people within the SABC, as we sit here today, who have had almost exactly the same experience. In many instances, they may not have got to that point where they got to the money. They would just have said, look, I can't take this discussion further, I'm going to just walk away, and they wouldn't have engaged, and they may then have done something different in terms of that particular approach. So I think that one of the ways we have to future-proof this is to look at where we are.
Yeah.
For an entity like the public broadcaster, SABC, the simple answer is, if the SABC wants to survive, if journalism wants to survive, these aren't nice to haves that journalists are seen to be credible and that they aren't going to accept bribes. These are existential crises that says, if you don't do this, the profession is no different to anyone who is on social media. At the moment, what distinguishes them and SABC is that you are obliged to adhere to the highest levels and highest standards of ethical professional journalism. It then means that everyone at SABC has to abide by that, and anyone that doesn't, they need to be exposed, they need to be removed, they need to be disciplined in the strongest terms.
So lastly, and any of you can take this, Dr. Hlungwani, you can jump in, or William, you can take it. What conversation do you believe to be happening within the public relations, government communicator, corporate communicator space about the possibility of making stories go away? And is there a conversation to be had within that space as the other arm of the practice of communication?
Well, I suppose PRs, most in many cases, they use money to buy into perceptions, you know. You can advertise your way into how people should perceive you, should perceive you in public. But I doubt that a good name can be bought, you know. And I think these companies, they have a budget for which they use to sometimes slow, you know, people in the media space to come and network with, and they use such engagement to have to understand or to gauge issues of perception in the public, in the public space. But I doubt that one should be able to buy a journalist. How do you do that? But also maybe it speaks to what then the minister said to public way, that perhaps this was done before, and how many other people, if you people maybe would have been bribed and taken the money, and which I think it has an impact on how then the public see journalists as these people who are supposed to safeguard against wrongdoing, because if one has to take money from the public, whether it's a minister or anyone in the business space, what then does that say about you as a professional? So I think this would have sent a scare, somehow to private, to public, to businesses. It can't just be done, without expecting any punishment on that.
All right. I've got to thank both of you for your time this afternoon. That's Dr. Trevor Hlungwani, media and journalism lecturer, as well as William Bird, who is from Media Monitoring Africa, director of that entity.